Okay, so I've seen 28 years later The Bone Temple, and this is the direct continuation of the previous entry while continuing this franchise. And it is following up on Ralph Fiennes' Ian Kelson and Spike after what happened. And especially for what I can say, I think that this is one of the better entries that I've seen compared to the previous movie. But I'm gonna explain all that in this video. And so this will be my full non-spoiler review. Go over my thoughts and my impressions, especially for what really worked and compared to the last entry, and what really made it a more story focused as an entry there, especially from all the horror and all the gore and all the stuff I'm gonna talk about here right now. And so, if you're new, then be sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell so I'm on any future videos. But now, let's talk about this movie. And now, as far for how we've come with this franchise, and even with the 28 years later, which literally came out like last year, which I really liked, but the ending really baffled my experience for how we look at that movie. It really tarnished my experience. But now, going into The Bone Temple, it's a direct continuation and following up on that storyline that was set up, and especially following Ralph Fiennes' character, who is Ian Kelson, who is living out in The Bone Temple, and even with Spike that has later joined this cult with the sort of Jimmies, and literally like this is like the storyline that is more story focused than what the previous entry did, and I would say that this was pretty much more enjoyable than for how it all comes together. And I have to admit, from the performances to how they handle all the gore and just all the kills alone, it really elevates the experience even more. And even though they really wanted to expand on the franchise, and with 28 years later that would like become like a whole series, but now when you follow up on a storyline from the previous movie but even make it better, that's what I really liked. It was more of like a plot focused driven movie that really made me appreciate this even more. Ralph Fiennes, who I really enjoy more than the previous film, we really get to focus more on his character, because especially for what his purpose is making a cure for the rage virus, if he can make a cure, and for how it really focuses on each specific storyline. And I think it is a brilliantly well done entry that I think it is a well achieved type of movie, and this experience, it was well worth it. And even comparing to what 28 years later, plus it was shot differently. It was shot with iPhone cameras, but with this movie, it is completely different for how we look at this follow-up sequel. And with Nia DaCosta, who really took on the director chair, which I was really hesitant with her take on this story, and even if it became her recent movie, but how she dives into the horror world within this series, it is well achieved. And she really knows like pen to paper for how this could really work for the audience. And I think from like the sense of like the post-apocalyptic world, and from having all these signs from the infected, and how it really conveys like towards human beings. And I have a feeling that this series is gonna end on a high note, especially for what's gonna be set up for part 3. I think it is the finale of the franchise, and I think I adore Ralph Fiennes for what they really put into his character, for what he puts into his portrayal. And also, Jack O'Connell really plays this villain so well, and I really enjoy him for what he really puts into his character. And I think for what you thought about him in the last entry 28 years later, but don't worry, for how they do this character in the follow-up, and I think you'll find his character even more terrifying, even for when he is leading this cult with Spike along, but even for how it's introduced literally from the start of the movie, for how it really conveys and how it really all ties together for a brilliant storyline, for how it really comes together for a really epic horror sequel. And I gotta admit, I was far more impressed just with this alone. I really like Spike, and he really got his time to shine, and just how he's handled this type of survival with this group. And even though I had a definite feeling when Spike's story is focused less throughout parts of the movie, but I really enjoyed just Spike's character either way. I thought his character really shined through just a little bit, and out of the performances I really got enjoyment out of is with Ralph Fiennes, Jack O'Connell, and just out of anything that they put into this horror sequel, or how I look at this film. And I think this is a much more enjoyable film. If you thought that the ending of 28 Years Later really tarnished your experience for how you want to go into this film, don't worry. I mean, you'll be very impressed for what they have to pull off. It's a very more deep layered story, and how it expands the world building for how we look at the series as a whole. And just with Dr. Kelson's character presence and the way that he really feels more like a doctor, and he becomes friends with the infected, and for how it really draws his language for how he interacts just from the character perspective, and even for how Dr. Kelson really wants to save the world from the rage outbreak based for what he plans, and for how it's really driven and focused throughout all of this movie. And I have to say, when it all really comes together towards the third act, that's when it really hits home for me, and it really makes for a great final product. And I do have to admit, the ending is a real game changer and a real setup for part 3, and I think it is definitely for how they want to wrap up this series with a bang. And also, I will not give anything away, but for what they set up towards the final minutes of the movie with that surprise character appearance, and even though it's already out there, but you'll have to see it for yourself in order to know how it's gonna go down in the next entry. Yep, I won't say anything else past that, but I think you should definitely watch until like the very end, because yeah, there are some surprises, and it totally ties back to the earlier movies. If you know, you know. And just for my thoughts in general, this was an entry that was very much needed in order to give the audience that feel that, hey, they are not continuing for what that mess was set up from the last movie, but make this entry even better to give it even more clarity for what the audience is in for. And that's how I generally felt just by walking out of the theater. I was very satisfied for how they handled everything. Even though I thought the pacing was a bit stiff, it can be a bit slow, but it definitely got me hooked and invested into the storylines that this movie wanted to deliver, and it did on its promise. Beginning, middle, and end, it really sets off on like a great sequel. So I guess for my final thoughts, I really enjoyed the film, and I think it's a definite recommend. And even if you were disappointed in how they ended the last entry, but don't worry, you'll be in for a treat. And I think even like the final minutes of the movie, it'll definitely get you screaming like for part 3 now. But I think there are real plans for how like they're gonna really just like end this thing with. And I think Jack O'Connell is probably gonna be the most talked about thing ever from this movie, because he really pulls off a great villain role. And from Ralph Fiennes to everyone that really pulled this off, it's a really great banger from this series. But yeah, I definitely enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. But yeah, that's gonna do it for this video. Just let me know in the comments down below, and what were your thoughts on 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple, if you've seen it, and give your rating between 1 out of 10, 10 being the highest, in the comments down below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe and turn on notifications about future videos. Also follow all my social medias, all linked down below. And with that, I'll see you in the next video. Peace.